due to a bet with his friends. Adrian pretended to be broke and dated me for 3 years. When my only relative developed cancer, I accidentally found out his true identity. I asked him for a loan but only received his heartless ridicule. At my most desperate moment, I accepted being kept by Ethan. Several years later, Ethan went bankrupt. When I went for a job interview at a new company, I encountered Adrian. Examined my somewhat worn business suit and smeared. "I heard your sponsor went under. Are you here? Hunting for a new patron?" I smiled courteously. "Just a regular job interview, Mr. Thompson. If there's nothing else, I'll be going now. My husband is waiting for me at home." I walked past him directly, but he seized my shoulder and pinned me against the corridor wall. His face was livid as he asked through clenched teeth, "Your husband?" My shoulder blade crashed hard into the frigid wall, and as the throbbing pain spread through my nerves, I found it ridiculous. Just moments earlier, the warm-faced interviewer had graciously taken my resume and told me, "Mr. Hayes, you may head home now. We'll notify you once we have results." I understood this phrasing was merely a gentle refusal. Nearly 30 years old, finding work isn't easy, so I wasn't particularly disappointed. But upon leaving the office, encountered someone who caught me off guard. Adrian, my former boyfriend to be precise. He appeared quite different from my recollections. Yet when he gazed at me, the division in his eyes and his aloof, superior demeanor gradually merged with the impression he'd left during our final encounter. This wasn't his family's corporation. Perhaps that memory was too profound. Or maybe someone harbored private resentment and jealousy. When submitting applications, I intentionally avoided enterprises connected to Thompson Industries. I never anticipated meeting him here. Perhaps he felt similarly. His fleeting astonishment was gradually replaced by an increasingly scrutinizing expression. His gaze seemed intent on stripping me, bare from neckline to sleeve cuffs. I suddenly realized I hadn't worn this suit recently. Perhaps it appeared somewhat threadbare and destitute. Predictably so the next instant, he chuckled coldly. "I heard your patron collapsed. What's this, searching for a fresh target?" This was precisely the attitude I could have anticipated. Ethan's spectacular fall had likely become prime gossip within Adrian's social circle. As Ethan's companion, I, who had always been scorned by Adrian and his associates, had presumably become fodder for their conversations. Years ago, I might have impulsively stormed into their mocking gathering and confronted them about their malicious intent. But years ago I actually did precisely that. During that time, Adrian remained the driven, impoverished young man in my perception. He was my chosen life partner, my forever love. During university, I juggled various part-time positions to survive financially. That's where I encountered Adrian. Dressed modestly yet possessed a strikingly captivating face. We merely crossed paths briefly at a cafe, yet he immediately began courting me. Like myself, he lacked distinguished lineage and frequently fretted over living costs. However, his determined, ambitious nature genuinely captivated me. We naturally became a couple. One academic year followed by 2 post-graduation years. A dilapidated rental unit. I believed we would gradually improve our circumstances. But fate strikes the vulnerable hardest. Just as I'd finally accumulated a modest down payment, I received tragic news. My mother and stepfather perished in an automobile accident. My 17-year-old half-sister survived, but was diagnosed with cancer. My sister remained under her paternal aunt's care. Yet even familial bonds have limitations. My mother and stepfather's inheritance was depleted. I assumed responsibility for my sister's medical costs. I concealed this from Adrian. He already faced sufficient hardship, without additional burdens from my circumstances. Therefore, I secretly acquired another part-time position. This employment revealed Adrian's deception. I served night shifts at an exclusive establishment, working continuously daily. I shed 20 pounds previous evening. Adrian had grasped my wrist, questioning whether I'd been overexerting myself lately. He promised to intensify his efforts. Youth's eyes shine brilliantly even in darkness. I believed I could depend on him for support. Yet just beyond a doorway, I detected a recognizable voice within a private chamber. I stood outside, clutching beverages, preparing to knock when I overheard a sardonic voice heading upstairs. Earlier I spotted a server resembling Adrian's boyfriend quite closely. The speaker deliberately stressed boyfriend with unmistakable mockery. Amused chatter filled the room. Instinctively, I withdrew my raised hand. Subsequently, I heard Adrian's voice. "Boyfriend. Adrian left. Wasn't that the penalty you morons devised for me? Merely entertainment. What significance does he hold?" Adrian claiming it's entertainment, while maintaining this charade for 3 years, masquerading as destitute. Have you become obsessed with this performance? Isn't it draining? As stated, pure amusement. How could it be taxing? Observing his daily disheveled, grimy appearance provides considerable entertainment. Immediately following his statement, I burst through the door. I'm typically not rash. However, I was overwhelmed during that period. Exhausted from securing my sister's medical funding, combined with the anguish of romantic betrayal, prompted this singular impulsive act. Witnessing my silent yet furious expression, Adrian was stunned. He never expected my appearance there before all his companions. His 3-year deception was exposed. My hands trembled violently. I questioned him. Adrian, do you find this amusing? Adrian wore an expensive suit beyond my comprehension, his wrist bearing a timepiece that cast magnificent reflections, under the lighting that represented a realm I'd never accessed. Following momentary alarm, he composed himself, reclining against the plush sofa while sneering at me. Observing your current state, I find it rather tedious. I hurled my drink at his face. His associate shoved me to the floor. Do you comprehend who this is? Your entire family's existence couldn't compensate for one of Adrian's garments. My palm scraped across glass fragments, producing searing pain. Adrian's frigid glare, and the surrounding expressions of rage or amusement, assaulted my sensory perception. My entire family's existence. Considering my sister still battling for survival in her hospital bed, I cannot recall how I departed that chamber so disgracefully. That evening Adrian didn't return to our rental for multiple days. Naturally, his impoverishment, masquerade, and manipulation had concluded he possessed no motivation to return. Yet one evening, returning home following extended work hours, I discovered Adrian occupying a chair. Upon seeing me, Adrian immediately interrogated, "Why haven't you contacted me?" I was thoroughly drained and unwilling to engage in further conflict with him. Leaning against the doorway, I suddenly recalled his associate's statement from that day. Your entire family's existence couldn't compensate for one of Adrian's garments. I looked at Adrian, sitting in the cheap plastic chair of my cramped apartment, looking entirely out of place in his bespoke tailoring. The smell of damp drywall and cheap instant noodles seemed to offend him just by existing. You need money, Adrian stated. It wasn't a question. He had likely looked into my sudden disappearance from the club. Your sister's medical bills. It's cancer, right? I remained silent, my hand gripping the doorknob. He leaned forward, a casual, almost predatory smile touching his lips. I can give it to you. $1 million. $2 million. Whatever it takes to keep her breathing. He paused, his eyes trailing down my exhausted frame. All you have to do is ask nicely. Beg me, Julian. Show me that same desperation you had when you were working 3 jobs for our future. Entertain me. In that fraction of a second, the last lingering ghost of the boy I had loved died completely. There was no misunderstanding. No hidden pain. Just a rich, bored heir who viewed my family's tragedy as a bargaining chip for his ego. Get out, I whispered, my voice devoid of anger, left only with the hollow ring of absolute exhaustion. Don't be stupid, Adrian sneered, standing up. Your pride won't buy chemo. Get out, I roared, throwing the door wide open. He left, leaving a sneer and a lingering scent of expensive cologne that made me want to vomit. It was the next night, drowning in past due hospital bills, that Ethan walked into the VIP room of the club. He was 10 years older, a self-made logistics magnate, and he didn't ask me to beg. He looked at my bruised knuckles, asked my price, and paid my sister's medical fees in full by the next morning. I became his kept man. It was supposed to be a transaction. I didn't expect him to be kind. I didn't expect him to teach me business, to respect my boundaries, or to hold me when the night terrors of my parents' accident woke me up in cold sweats. And I certainly didn't expect that 3 years later, we would be standing in a courthouse, quietly signing marriage papers. Crash. The pain in my shoulder blade radiating from the cold corridor wall snapped me back to the present. Your husband. Adrian's voice was a low, dangerous hiss. His grip on my suit jacket was white-knuckled, twisting the worn fabric. The elegant, aloof facade he had worn just moments ago in the lobby had shattered completely. Let go of me, Mr. Thompson, I said, my voice steady. I didn't struggle. Struggling was what predators wanted. I simply met his gaze with dead, flat eyes. Ethan Vance is bankrupt, Adrian spat, his breath hot against my face. He's liquidated his assets. His properties are foreclosed. He's a sinking ship, Julian. And you married him? You sold yourself to him for money, and now he has nothing. That is none of your concern, I replied, forcing my arm up to break his grip. We are legally married. And unlike some people, I don't abandon my partner when their bank account drops to zero. The word struck him like a physical blow. A muscle feathered in his jaw. For a fleeting second, I saw something masquerading as hurt in his eyes, but it was quickly swallowed by toxic, bruised pride. You think you're so noble, Adrian laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He took a step back, straightening his own immaculate lapels. Let's see how noble you are when you're starving. You think you're going to get a job in this city? In my industry? You're a college dropout who spent his 20s warming a billionaire's bed. I'll manage, I said, smoothing down my jacket. I turned on my heel and walked toward the elevators. He can't give you anything anymore, Julian. Adrian yelled down the polished marble hallway. When you get tired of eating scraps, you know where to find me. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of Adrian's furious face, I finally let out a shaky breath. My shoulder throbbed, but underneath the physical pain was a strange, soaring sense of relief. The monster from my past was just a man. A pathetic, empty man. The bus ride to the outer suburbs took an hour and a half. The luxury penthouse Ethan and I used to share overlooking the skyline was gone, replaced by a modest two-bedroom walk-up in a working-class neighborhood. When I unlocked the door, the smell of simmering garlic and tomatoes hit me. Ethan was in the cramped kitchen, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and sweatpants, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. The silver at his temples seemed a bit more pronounced than it had 6 months ago, but his broad shoulders were relaxed. "Hey," he said, turning around with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and crossed the linoleum floor, wrapping his arms around my waist. He kissed my forehead. "How did the interview go?" I leaned into his chest, listening to the steady, comforting thrum of his heartbeat. "They gave me the "we'll call you" speech, and I ran into Adrian." Ethan's hands stopped moving. The air in the kitchen grew heavy. He knew everything about Adrian. "Did he touch you?" Ethan asked, his voice dropping an octave, the remnants of the ruthless businessman he used to be bleeding through his gentle demeanor. "Just cornered me. He knows about the bankruptcy. He thinks I'm looking for a new sugar daddy." I pulled back and offered a small, reassuring smile. I told him I was going home to my husband. Ethan exhaled slowly, his jaw unclenching. He reached up and gently brushed my hair back. "I'm sorry, Julian. I'm sorry you have to deal with him. And I'm sorry you have to wear that old suit and ride the bus. You shouldn't have to scramble for entry-level jobs because of my failures." "Stop," I said firmly, placing a hand over his mouth. 3 years ago you saved Lily's life. She's a sophomore in pre-med now because of you. You gave me a home when I was broken. It's my turn to pull the weight. And besides," I smirked slightly, "your pasta sauce is way better than the Michelin star garbage we used to eat." Ethan laughed, the tension breaking. "Go wash up. Dinner's in 5. Over the next month, Adrian made good on his threat. I sent out over 40 resumes. I had a few callbacks, but inevitably, right before the final hiring stage, the offers would miraculously vanish. HR managers would look at me with pity and stammer out excuses about shifting company directions. Thompson Industries had its fingers in every major corporate pie in the city. Adrian was actively blacklisting me. By the 5th week, our savings were dangerously low. Ethan spent his days glued to his laptop, taking obscure phone calls and analyzing endless spreadsheets, trying to salvage what was left of his logistics network from the bankruptcy proceedings. I couldn't sit around anymore. I stopped applying to corporate jobs. Instead, I walked down to a high-end auto repair shop a few miles from our apartment. The owner, a gruff man named Miller, didn't care about corporate blacklists. He cared that I knew how to manage inventory and keep the books balanced. He hired me on the spot for $20 an hour. It wasn't glamorous. My hands smelled like motor oil, and I came home exhausted, but it kept the lights on. One rainy Tuesday, about 3 months into my new job, I was at the front counter organizing invoices when a sleek, black Maybach pulled into the garage. The rain drummed heavily against the tin roof of the shop as the driver's door opened, and a man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped out, holding a large umbrella. It was Adrian. He didn't bring a car to be fixed. He just stood there in the damp garage, looking around at the oil stains, the scattered tools, and finally, at me. I was wearing a greasy mechanic's shirt over a white tee, holding a clipboard. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The mechanic in the back was running an impact wrench, the loud whir clack filling the silence. Adrian's eyes flicked over my dirty clothes. He looked disgusted, but beneath it, there was a dark, obsessive hunger that made my skin crawl. "I bought this property this morning," Adrian said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise of the garage. "Miller is retiring early, which means I am now your employer." I slowly lowered the clipboard. "Is there no limit to your boredom, Adrian?" He stepped closer, closing his umbrella. "I told you you wouldn't survive without me. Look at you. You're working in a garage, Julian. Ethan Vance is a corpse in the business world. He's facing federal audits. His debts are over 30 million. He's dragging you down into the mud with him." "I like the mud," I said flatly. "It washes off. Stains on your character don't." Adrian slammed his hand down on the metal counter, making the pens jump. "Why are you so stubborn? I am offering you a way out. Leave him. File for divorce. Come back to me, and I will wipe Vance's debts clean. I'll buy him a little house in the suburbs and he can live quietly. And you." His gaze softened, a twisted, toxic kind of affection leaking through. "You will never have to worry about money, or your sister, ever again. We can go back to how we were." "How we were?" I scoffed, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated anger. You mean when you lied to me every day? When you watched me starve myself to pay our rent while you and your friends laughed about the poor boy you were playing with? It was a mistake, Adrian shouted, his composure shattering. I was young. It was a stupid game, but I fell in love with you, Julian. I just didn't know how to tell you the truth. And when you threw that drink in my face and walked out, it drove me insane. And then you went to him. He spat Ethan's name like poison. I went to him because he was a man, Adrian. You were a parasite. Adrian's face twisted into an ugly snarl. He reached into his coat and pulled out a manila folder, tossing it onto the counter. Look at it. Those are Vance's remaining assets. In 48 hours, the bank is going to seize the last warehouse he owns in the harbor. When they do, he goes to prison for defaulting on his federal loans. You have 2 days, Julian. Pack your bags, come to my penthouse, or watch your husband get locked in a cage. He turned and walked back to his Maybach, leaving me standing in the cold, damp air. I didn't open the folder. I threw it directly into the trash can. When I got home that night, the apartment was dark except for the glow of Ethan's laptop at the kitchen table. He was rubbing his temples, a half-empty glass of whiskey next to his mouth. I walked up behind him and wrapped my arms around his shoulders, burying my face in his neck. He smelled like cedar and stress. He found me today, I murmured. Ethan went perfectly still. What did he do? Bought the garage. Fired my boss. Tried to blackmail me. I kissed his cheek, my voice steady. He said they're seizing the harbor warehouse in 2 days. He said you're going to prison. Ethan slowly turned in his chair, pulling me by the waist so I stood between his knees. He looked up at me, his dark eyes intense, scanning my face for fear. When he found none, a slow, predatory smile spread across his lips. A smile I hadn't seen since his days as a titan of industry. Did he now? Ethan murmured, wrapping his arms around my lower back. Adrian Thompson always was arrogant. His father built that empire, but Adrian doesn't know how to read the finer details. I frowned, looking down at him. Ethan, what are you talking about? Ethan pulled me into his lap, resting his chin against my chest. Julian, do you know why I filed for Chapter 11 instead of Chapter 7 bankruptcy? To restructure? I guessed. To trap them, Ethan said softly. When my logistics company started bleeding money, it wasn't an accident. Thompson Industries was illegally undercutting my shipping routes, bribing union bosses, and starving me out of the market. They wanted a monopoly on the East Coast ports. Adrian thought he was a genius for crushing me. Ethan reached out, tapped a few keys on his laptop, and turned the screen toward me. It wasn't a spreadsheet of debts. It was a live stock ticker, and a series of confidential legal documents. I let them think I was dying, Ethan explained, his eyes gleaming with cold calculation. I let Adrian buy up all my bad debt, including the lien on that harbor warehouse. But what Adrian doesn't know is that 6 months ago, I quietly sold the proprietary routing algorithm I developed, the one that actually made my company valuable, to an overseas conglomerate for $200 million. My breath hitched. $200 million? It's been sitting in a blind trust, Ethan said, kissing the inside of my wrist. I needed Thompson Industries to overextend themselves trying to buy my debt infrastructure. They poured half their liquid capital into securing my old ports, assuming my tech patents were included in the bankruptcy sweep. He clicked open an email from a major law firm. They aren't, Ethan whispered. Tomorrow morning, the European Trade Commission is announcing that Thompson's newly acquired ports are completely incompatible with the new global shipping standards backed by my algorithm. Their new infrastructure is worthless. By Friday, Thompson Industries stock will plummet by 40%. The bank won't be seizing my warehouse, Julian. They'll be calling in Adrian's margins. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at my husband, this quiet, brilliant man who had spent the last 6 months eating cheap pasta and wearing faded shirts, absorbing my exhaustion and fear, all while quietly orchestrating the greatest financial guillotine the city had ever seen. You didn't tell me, I breathed. Ethan's expression softened into deep regret. He pulled me tighter. I couldn't. It had to be airtight. If Adrian suspected even for a second that we had a safety net, he would have targeted you and Lily through back channels. I needed him to think he had won. I needed him blind. Can you forgive me? I didn't answer with words. I grabbed the collar of his t-shirt and kissed him, pouring all the exhaustion, relief, and love I had into him. 48 hours later, the financial world exploded. It was front-page news. Thompson Industries caught in massive antitrust violations and catastrophic investment failures. The overseas conglomerate had filed a brutal injunction, freezing Adrian's assets. We didn't watch the news from our cramped apartment. We watched it from the back of a private car, dressed in bespoke suits, heading toward the Thompson Industries corporate headquarters. Ethan had an emergency shareholder meeting to attend, as their newly minted majority debt holder. When we walked into the glass-walled boardroom on the top floor, the air was thick with panic. Lawyers were shouting, board members were sweating, and sitting at the head of the table, looking pale and disheveled, was Adrian. The room fell dead silent when the heavy oak door swung open. Ethan walked in with the calm, terrifying grace of an apex predator. I walked slightly behind him, my head held high, wearing a brand new, impeccably tailored navy suit. Adrian's eyes locked onto me, his face draining of whatever color was left. The realization of what had happened, how badly he had been outplayed, hit him in real time. Vance, a board member stammered. You have no right to be here. I hold the notes on 51% of your leveraged assets, Ethan said, his voice dropping into the room like a granite block. He didn't look at the board member. He looked directly at Adrian. I have every right to be here. Ethan placed a single folder on the table and slid it down the polished wood until it stopped in front of Adrian. Chapter 11 Restructuring is a beautiful thing, Adrian, Ethan said smoothly. It allowed me to legally subordinate your hostile takeover into a trap. You bought my empty buildings, and I bought your debt for pennies on the dollar. Adrian's hands were shaking. He looked from the folder to Ethan and finally, desperately, to me. Julian. Adrian croaked, his voice cracking. The arrogance was gone. The superiority was gone. For the first time in his life, Adrian Thompson was truly, genuinely broke. I looked at him. I remembered the boy in the cafe who had charmed me. I remembered the boy who watched me work until my hands bled, treating my life like a spectator sport. I remembered the man who slammed me into a wall and threatened my family. I felt nothing. No anger. No triumph. Just pity. You told me a few days ago that you were offering me a way out. I said quietly, the entire boardroom hanging on my every word. You told me when I was tired of eating scraps, I knew where to find you. I stepped forward and placed a $20 bill on top of Ethan's folder. Buy yourself something to eat, Mr. Thompson. You look awful. I turned my back on him. I didn't wait to see his reaction, or hear the lawyers start tearing him apart. I walked out of the boardroom, the doors clicking shut behind me, sealing his fate. A few moments later, Ethan stepped out into the hallway, leaving his legal team to handle the slaughter. He walked up to me, loosening his tie with a heavy sigh, and took my hand. Ready to go home? He asked. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below us. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the streets. Yeah, I smiled, squeezing my husband's hand. Let's go home.